Okay, thanks for joining us for today's webinar titled Donor Retention, Acquisition, and Appeal Targeting, a case study with the University of Florida. I'm Doug Cogswell. I'm today's host. I'm the President and CEO of Advisor Solutions. I've been working in the business intelligence and data analysis sector for the last 15 or so years and have extensive work in advancement fundraising through the work of Advisor over the last 5 or 6 years. With me is Audrey Joffrey from the University of Florida. Hi, Audrey.
Hi, everyone.
We are going to start out just talking about the general situation and environment we find in many of our clients, and then Audrey's going to talk about what Florida's done using data to help the whole donor cultivation annual fund program become more effective. At a high level, we find that most fundraisers blanket their prospects with a myriad of messages which are delivered through a variety of media. Some of these messages connect well with certain prospect segments and others fall flat. And this chart sort of captures what we often see. Each bar here is a program is a theme. It could be made up of multiple types of appeals. It could be phone, email, letters merged together. And in this particular case, there's 34 appeal programs, and there's 8 of them that are on the left here in green, yielding better than 2%. Here's one that's up at 7.5%. That's great. But there's 26 of them, the others, that run down, and many of them have extremely low yields. And we'll often see there's a lot of sends in these programs, a lot of investment, but they're just not producing results. Another way of looking at that graphically is this is something called a heat map. So each of these quadrants is one of those bars. Here's the April program. Here's the homecoming program. And each of these little boxes is a specific appeal send within the program. So some of these would be emails. Some of them would be specific letters and so forth. Here, green means it's good, the higher yields. Red means it's bad, the lower yields. And then the size is how many sends there were. So this is visually showing you that there's an awful lot of these bigger programs that have a lot of sends that just have very low yield. The ones that are doing better, this class appeal, you can see the actual appeals are much more focused. They're smaller, they're more personalized, and they're getting traction and doing quite well. And some of these appeals over here, like the Happy A and the Seasons, we know are theme-based around certain topic areas, and they're doing better. So when you look at this, one of the messages is there's often a lot of effort that goes into hitting an alumni group up or a prospect group up with messages that are falling flat. Another look at this is looking at touch points. This chart is showing people who have been sent. The left is a person who's been sent a couple of appeals in the last 12 months of the fiscal year. Over on the right is somebody who's been sent almost 25. And the coloring here is the type of the appeal. The blue at the bottom are general letters, some specialized letters, some phone calls. So what you see here is half the population is getting roughly 10 or less touches, solicitations a year. And these are the donors, and that's pretty good. The problem here is the right half is getting hit up to 25 times the solicitations, which is way too much. We generally like to see a target range of maybe 8 to 12, not 25. And you can sort of see what's this big red area are email appeals. So they're getting this group is getting a lot of these general messages coming out that just are not having any result. In fact, you end up over-touching, and I might use the more aggressive word, harassing some of your donors by doing this. So a lot of the work here is to figure out where the over-touches are happening, which appeals are working, how they're working with different groups of people, and focusing them down. The challenge is there's a lot of activities on untangling what worked and what didn't can be challenging, and it often involves accessing large amounts of data, different systems, slicing and dicing it, and so it's tricky to get at this. There are a set of questions that are really relevant, and as we work across the market space here, we find obviously where is participation headed? Key question. And there's 3 subcomponents to that. Retention of the current donors, and in any customer marketing sales environment, the key is retaining your current customers. So that's really important and probably has the most leverage. Reacquiring those that have lapsed, and then acquiring non-donors. And so if an effective program creates messaging in segments that deal with maximizing all 3 of these. Other questions, which appeals and messaging work best? Data can tell you that. which events and activities? What are the characteristics of our larger donors who replied to our appeals? Who else has the same characteristics? So you can mine the data and figure out, were these people science majors? Are they young alums? Had they been involved in other alumni activities? And use those characteristics to then target going forward. Who are the lapse donors? What happened? Why are they different than those that didn't lapse? What about the non-donors? And one of the things that we see can be highly important and valuable is the online media, because that can tell you, for example, if you take newsletter click-throughs, the prospects are giving you indications of interest, and we'll see that some group will click on the neuroscience articles. Well, obviously they've got an interest in neuroscience. Somebody else is going to come through and click on the football program articles. They've got an interest in sports. And very few of our clients use this today, but this is highly powerful information. It's current, and it's people opting in and expressing interest areas. So this is the kind of stuff that if you can lever this in, helps give you interest areas that you can then create theme-based messages around and try to turn around the situation of generic messages that fall flat with so many people. And there's an interplay here. You've got the messaging, the media that's used to put it out, be it email, phone, social media, personal letters, whatever. The timing, some people respond differently in December than June. You've also got themes about what the organization is doing. I mean, if you're having a big kickoff for a neuroscience center, that's probably a better time to time in messages like this than when that's not happening. Then, of course, the characteristics of the prospect. And we put message and prospect in big letters because aligning those together really gets the most bang for the buck and the highest yields. So let's look at an example here. Why is our participation rates falling? So I'm going to open up a project here, which is leveraging the data. Let's give this some room. This is loading up. This is disguised data from actually a merge of several of our clients. It's opening in a browser. It's typical for what we would have as a project. It's a multi-page project. We're looking at a program summary on the first page. There's some page on the giving segments, appeals, and then characteristics of the people. The general stats, there's 56,000 alums or prospects. Here's their giving statistics. Year to date, they've given 22 million. Numbers of gifts, average gift is $800. Appeal, they've been 55,000 roughly people have gotten appeals. They've been sent 845 things. That's 10 to 15 to 1 ratio. That's pretty high. We've got some segments. This is reasonably typical. The current donors, 25,000 of them, or the brush up shows 24%. The lapsed donors, 18%. That's a bit high. The non-donors is the balance, 39%. And then we could break each of these segments. The current donors break into 5-year, consecutive, 4-year. So you can break the population apart and look at it. And if you wanted to see, who are my 4-year consecutive donors, this is all interactive. I just click on it with the mouse. It shows me I've got 4,435 4-year consecutive current donors. They've given $3 million this year. Here's what they've been sent. These other pages all linked, so I could go to the entity list page. Here's the list of the 4,435 people. I could export that out and do something with it. Or maybe I wanted to go down here. Are they current fiscal year first-time donors, yes or no? I could just click the yes. 22 of them. That's not very many because we're coming into the end of the fiscal year. They've only given $1,260 for an average gift of $37. So that's a little low, but that's the idea here. You have all of this data. There's a summary page you're looking at. You can slice it all these different ways. And our question was participation rate. It's falling off. I mean, this organization did a great job in 08-09 to push it way up. We could go back and look at what they did, but since then it's fallen from, up here it's at 45%. It's dropped down to lower percentage, and in year to date, which is almost done, 12 is coming in lower. Well, we can look at this different ways, and here's the giving by month, by gift size. We can look at it by gift details and slice it different ways by the source to the extent we know it. Was it a letter or web what brought it in? Was it a gift, a pledge payment? What was it allocated to? So we could sub-split the problem down, but for now let's keep it at this level. And here's something where we're actually doing a lot of work where we're taking the participation and trying to break it down into current donors or live bunts, lapsed donors or side bunts, or non-donors. And in this case, we saw the numbers at the first page for the current year, 2012, but here's my trend in non-donors over time. It's come down. I've done a reasonably good job of bringing some back. I've been acquiring, it looks like, picked up into the mid-4s, 4.2, 4.3% here, acquisition of non-donors becoming donors. 2012, we saw earlier, not many of them so far. It's fallen way off. We're coming in the end of the year. This could be something to focus on. But, if you look at the numbers here, if you could bring this up to 4%, it's 4% of 20-something thousand. It's like 900 people. That's a group, but it's probably more substantial to figure out how come my lapsed donors are going up, because they've come up several thousand over the last few years. You can see the reacquisition rates drop, so that's a little bit alarming. So I might want to dive into this. I'm going to do this fairly quickly, but this is the kind of thing you can do with this. I can grab over here, select the 2011 live bunts, which meant they were current in 11. They gave a gift in 10. I get them. I exclude everybody else. I'm going to now see the profile for that group. They had been, some of them current the years before, but some of them lapsed in 12. This is the group of 5,313 who were current in 11 but lapsed in 12. I can grab them, drop down to the intersection of that population. So now I've got 5,313 people or donors who were live bunts in 11 but became side bunts in 12. That they gave in 10, they didn't give in 11. And some of them have been reacquired this current fiscal year. Let's take a look at that. Take a small 1,747. We can exclude them out. Now I've done a quick analysis to grab the live bunts from 11 who became side bunts in 12 and have not yet been reacquired in this fiscal year. There's 3,566 of them. Here's the list of them. I can go through these other pages, look at what appeals they've been sent. So this is the appeals for that group. Heavily web-based, heavily these 5 programs. You can sort of see by the coloring the web is red. This one is heavily web. This one is heavily web. This is more of a mix of media of some of the other types. But these are the non-theme-based programs that are just not connecting. Look at touch points for this group. It jumps. This is the people in that group. Here's at this level. This is a person who's been touched 1 time. Down here, you've got people who have been touched, 27 times. So it looks like 3/4 of the population have been touched 12 or more times heavily with these generic email blasts, and it's clearly not working. We need to do something different. We can keep going through the project and look at, for this group, who are they? They're heavily college, not the grad schools. Heavily alumni, not other record types. Look up here. Wow, I might not have thought this. This is 487 of them are the class of 2008. Looks like there's a lot of recent grads in here. Take a look at that group. Select it. That's 1,000. A third of this group of lapsed donors are young alums. And this is, so I brought these people on as donors, and I've lost them. But this is the group I really need to be cultivating going forward. So I need to really think about that and maybe focus on that. What about ratings? Bio. Top rated. They're not, there's a heavily non-rated, so these are, as we would expect, not in the major giving pool, more male, married, sports and I keep going through this. Sports, no sport, 61% didn't play a student sport. There was some crew, some, whatever this is, football. Over here, student activities, heavily fraternity, sorority. It looks like on this, 2,000 of them, or 62%, were in a fraternity or sorority. So I'm trying to get a handle on this group with messaging. I've just learned something. If I continued through this, I would find that they also have a sciences background, more life sciences, and interest in global affairs. So by doing this, I've got some ideas for themes I can come back at them, and I'd like to, if this is my program, I'd probably come back and say, hey, we've missed you. We're doing a lot of work in the sciences. We think you'd be interested in this, and we'd like to have you invest along with us in this kind of a program. Would you consider, contributing? Or you might build on this group with also with some of this fraternity, sorority, tradition theme that they might be interested in. But it's what we've done here is taken the data to untangle why participation was falling off. found a group that has recently been lapsed. I've got some themes for how to focus messaging on them. And if you could get half of these back on board, you're going to raise the overall participation rate back up by 5 or 6%, which is substantial and meaningful. So that's the kind of work we're doing. Audrey, let me turn it over to you and have you come in and talk through how you've done this kind of work at Florida.
Okay, hopefully everybody can see my screen now. I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we've done at the University of Florida. We've had advisors since 2009, I believe. So we've been using those data for a while. But even before then, we started working on the idea that our messaging was not particularly focused on themes that were geared toward what we were trying to accomplish at the University of Florida. So those things were in mind up in the, the vice president, president level of the university, even while we in the trenches were working on, okay, what do we do with the data? So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've done since then. Okay, so the first thing we decided we needed was an integrated strategy, and that was between all of the different communication points on campus. So our annual giving program is called the Florida Fund. So the Florida Fund met with the Alumni Association and the public relations team and the publications team and development and various units on campus, and also the people who designed the online presence for the entire university. And so these different disparate groups who all are involved in messaging got together and sort of thought, we really need to coordinate what we're doing and make sure that people who see our messages understand that, it's from a united front. So first thing we did, of course, was rationalize our brand. We're currently in the Florida Tomorrow campaign, which is rapidly coming to a close. So I'm sure we're going to be going through some of this again soon, but just to give an idea, we are the Gators. You can see our beautiful logo here, and this is our brand. And then our team decided that they needed to focus on a global priority. They came up with some initiatives centered around healthcare, sustainability, leadership for tomorrow's problem solving, the whole idea of Gator Nation being everywhere and global in its scope, and of course we have a focus on entrepreneurship and innovation. And these are our main themes. Of course, each unit might have its own focus beneath those ideas, but the global priority sort of supersedes anything at the unit level, and then the units just sort of have to make sure that their focus fits under these, at least one of these themes. Oops, I went in the wrong direction. Okay, so the plan was to address the current segmentation, well, actually at the time, segmentation strategy. At the time, our segments were pretty much, we had a young donor segment, and well, actually a young alumni segment, which was divided up into either donor, lapsed, long lapsed, or at the time we called them non-donors. Now we refer to them as future donors. We decided that in order to be more cost effective, that we would shift any segments to the email and online messaging focus. So if somebody has an email address, there's no reason to always have to send them a piece of direct mail. We decided we wanted to increase the frequency of relevant messages, not any message, but relevant messages. And then we wanted to simplify stewardship of the low-dollar donors by moving those sort of initiatives to the online space. And finally, we wanted to create a true encounter history and address production bottlenecks, and that's something, of course, we use Advisor for. We're still working on getting all the data that we could use. We still are not at this level where we have those click-throughs, but I would love to have the ones that Doug mentioned, because that would be awesome, but we're not quite there yet. Okay, so we went through a process to integrate these things. The powers that be created a checklist where they looked at all the different initiatives and all the things that they wanted to accomplish, and they tried to unify them, and they created this big master communication calendar, and they identified what they were already doing and made sure that it fit under all the things that I have already mentioned, and tried to figure out what was worth keeping around. And they made this big, huge chart. I'm not going to just leave this up there for a long time because I know it's really hard to read, but just an idea that they went through this big process to sort of come up with a focused plan. And our plan ended up with, these are just some visuals. I'm just going to show you them really quickly, just some visuals that we came up with to show these initiatives. Energy and sustainability. Here's the one for tomorrow's leaders. I love this picture. This is a great one for global cultures and economies. And, of course, the entrepreneurship and innovation, because we are working on incubating the next big idea. We have a new innovation park that we're working on, and we're all excited about this initiative. So how did we tackle this? Well, in the data end, and I will say that I am the Associate Director of Data Analysis for the Foundation, so my focus is the data end of things. What I just showed you was the high-level VP decision makers end of things, and now I, as the data person, had to figure out how to pull this all together and sort of look at what our data looks like, how do we focus, how do we figure out what we need in order to improve the way we were doing things in the Florida Fund. So I'm going to talk about this stuff later. I'm going to go ahead and show you.
Audrey,
okay.
I know one of the things that you guys did really well that we often don't see is you analyze the data, but then you had senior management totally behind doing something that was different, but enabling sort of higher levels of performance in new ways. And what we often don't see is that. So I don't know if you can comment for a minute on that, but you had really strong buy-in from the top.
We definitely did. They were definitely on board with not only going toward this focus, but actually becoming data-driven in the way they make decisions, which is why we have things like Advisor so that we can do that. And it's not just in terms of our annual fund, just to give to some background. We actually currently have 4 different Advisor projects running, one for prospect management, one for performance management, one for prospect identification, and then this one for our Florida Fund. And I've just popped up on the screen now. You should see our Florida Fund project. This one looks a little bit different from the one that Doug showed you because this is the client version rather than the server version. We are running the server version at UF. However, this was the easiest way I could show the project with all the names mapped. If you notice, there are no actual names here. I've got lots of X's, and that was just an easier way that I could keep this anonymous because this is some of our data. Just really quickly, I think the best way to show our case study is to give some scenarios. But before I do that, I want to give you a quick rundown on how our project is organized. Our project looks a little different from the one that Doug showed you. His looks like it was more focused around appeals as the center of the project itself, and so the picture that you can get from the data is going to be a little bit different than from what we have. Ours is organized around entities. Right now, you can see here in the record type filter that I have it selected for alumni only. So right now, loaded into the project on all the different pages, we'll only be looking at alumni of University of Florida. Since the focus is entity-centric, there may be some people in here who've never gotten an appeal from us, but they are our alumni, so we want to be able to incorporate them into segments if we so choose to acquire some non-donors and things like that. So I have over here some just quick summary information that I kept here by the entity page, and then I have it divided up into information that I can use to create segments and look at segments. And then over here I have some information on appeals and how our appeals are doing. And then at the very end I have a section on how our gifts and our pledges came through. So I thought I would start off today just by showing a couple of examples to answer some of those questions that Doug said in the beginning that people are asking about. There's no way in such a short time to go through all of those because those are a lot of questions. But I thought I would go through a couple that the people from Florida Fund told me were ones that they use Advisor for a lot. I will reiterate that I am the person who wrote the projects and not necessarily the end user, but I did get feedback from the end users so that they gave me an idea of the kinds of things they look at. So primarily, the Florida Fund people told me that they could not live without Advisor to do their jobs nowadays. They use it mainly for two things. One is for segmentation, and the other is for analysis. So I'm going to talk about segmentation first. They said that one of the bottlenecks, I did mention bottlenecks earlier, in designing a program or figuring out your segments is having to call computing and say, so how many people do I have in this particular segment? And that can take up to a week, not because it's a long time to write a query, but because the computing queue is so incredibly long. By the time somebody in computing gets to it, most of the people in Florida Fund would have 17 different other questions or exclusions or things that they want to know. And we don't have to wait anymore. Now we can just use our Advisor project. So I thought that a good segment to look at, because of some work that I did recently in my analysis hat, is I determined that our multi-generational gators tend to be really good givers. They give more on average than alumni who don't have children who went to University of Florida or who go to University of Florida. And it's just a really good segment for our population. So one question the Florida Fund might ask is, okay, we want to do a solicitation of current parents who are also alumni. How many people is that? What do we need to budget for our materials? Because we know we're going to focus the message that way. So one thing we can do is we can look on our segments page, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of anybody I'm not allowed to solicit because there's no point in keeping those people in the project. So I'm just going to exclude them from the project because we know we're not going to touch them. And then I'm very quickly going to come over here to this entity record type. Now you see most of them look like they're alumni. That's because I only have alumni in the project. These are secondary types. So if somebody is an alum and is in, they could also be a parent. So I'm going to just select the alumni who are parents. And I'm going to get rid of anybody who's not a parent just to see how many people that is. So it looks like I have 12,464 parent records. But some of those could be parents of U.S. alumni who are already alumni, and I'm looking for just current students. So I'm going to go to this connections page, and I'm going to look at children only because I'm only interested in children. Well, actually, probably also I'm going to add in some stepchildren here too as well, see if there are any of those. And I'm going to get rid of any relationships other than those because that's I'm really only interested in current children. And then I'm going to look and see what kind they are. And if they're students, that's the group I'm looking for. I need to put that back in replace mode. And I'm going to select students. And voila, it looks like I have 2,592 solicitable parent alumni. And I can make a decision as of, looking at my budget. Okay, so how do I want to solicit them? I know that I'm going to have a focus message about being a multi-generational gator and being possibly back on campus to see their kids after their own experience. But then I'm going to figure out, well, how do I want to spend my resources? So I can look back here on and let me just exclude everybody else, so we're only looking at them. I can look back here and look at, actually I have on the summaries page. I can look and see how many have good addresses. Most of them have good addresses, so I could do a mailing. Or if I have the budget, I might want to go ahead and do some phone calling. Phone calling tends to have a better outcome. However, it is more expensive, so it would depend on my budget what I would decide to do. And of course, I could always do an email touch as well because we have a lot of good email addresses. So that right there is an example of how we would use this, how we would use Advisor to figure out a segment, how to plan our approach, and how to figure out how many people we're shooting for. So that's one example. I'm going to go ahead and bring everybody back into the project so we can do a second question. So another thing that the Florida Fund staff uses Advisor for a lot besides segmentation is to analyze things. So I thought maybe one way we could do that, an example might be to look at how many people we acquired in 2010 who then renewed in 2011. And I'm going a few years back because I want to then compare that to people that we acquired in the following year, and then if they renewed and see if we did any better. So I'm going to go ahead into this section where it says appeals and acquisition, and I'm going to click on my acquisition page. I do have a page that's designed specifically for showing how and when people were acquired. Now, to be acquired by the Florida Fund is a little different. I'm sure every institution has their own way of deciding what acquisition means. We have an exclusion here for anybody who's given exclusively to or first to the radio station or to athletics, those people, or to the Alumni Association. Any of those people, if they've given to those three areas, they're not considered acquired by the annual fund. So you'll notice that when I select some of the things, people will look like they've given something before, but really they only gave to those three areas before. So I'm going to look at who did I acquire in 2010. So I'm going to go here and select my 2010 people. And since they're the only people I'm interested in, I'm just going to exclude everybody else. So I'm only looking at the acquired in 2010 group. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look over here in my gift cycle section and see, and this over here shows me how many gifts were given in that year by these 2,679 people who were acquired. And obviously the biggest line is that 2010 year when they joined. But now let me see how many of those people were retained in 2011. So it looks like 1,084 were retained of the, let's see, what did I say that was? 2,679. So if I did a quick percentage of that, that's roughly 40% came back in 2011. So let me see how I did the following year if I was able to retain the people acquired the following year. So I'm going to put everybody back into the project. I'm going to go back to my acquisition page, and let's look at the people who were acquired the following year in 2011. I'm going to exclude everybody else and go back to my gift cycles. And let's see. Now you notice it's a slightly lower number. That's 2,500 as opposed to 2,600. So I had less people acquired in 2011 than I did in 2010. Let me see how many I retained. So it looks like I retained 1,028, which is roughly, I would say that's about roughly 41, 42%. So I actually, even though I acquired less, I'm sorry, that's right. Even though I acquired slightly less, my retention went up a percentage or two. So I'm actually doing okay, and that's not too bad. I still want to acquire more, of course, and that would be something else that I could look at, and I can go through and do some further analysis. But this is just something, a couple of different ways to look at the data and see how we're doing. All right, so speaking of how are we doing, we actually do have loaded into this project something called Program Health. I'm going to click over here on this Program Health page, and we have these couple of graphs here. We have two different flavors of Program Health. This is everything in UF. That means major giving, membership, Gator Boosters, which is our athletics program, the giving to the radio station, all of that stuff is included here. This over here is looking specifically at Florida Fund appeals. So what I'm going to do is very quickly, I just want to see because, I don't know about you, but in the last few years there's been a lot of concern about how our programs are doing with the dip in the economy. So let's see if that really played out. So I'm going to look at the years 2010 to 2012 to see if our program sort of is mirroring the dip in the economy. So I'm going to select that stuff down here, and it should change my graph, and I'm just going to exclude the unselected so that I can just see that little bit in my graph. And if you look right here, it looks like we were up here in 2007 when we hadn't quite hit the crash. It was starting, but it was still fairly good. Oh, let me define what program health is. Some of you are probably wondering. The way we define program health is a calculation based on new donors plus reacquired donors, and that's the numerator, all divided by non-renewing people. So how many didn't renew? And that gives you a ratio, and you want your ratio to be greater than 1, of course, because you want your new and reacquired to be higher than the number that don't renew. And if you notice, we are above 1 here, which is good. But as the economy crashed, it looks like we pretty much crashed. And 2009 looks about the right time for things to have kind of gone a little south. I'm thinking, and this is just me speculating here, but my guess would be that the reason we had a big jump in 2010 is because in 2009, people were waiting before they gave. People were waiting to see before they were ready to write that check or send in that credit card number because people were not confident about the recovery in the economy. So you can see that we had a big jump the following year, which is probably explained by what I just said. People were waiting and they finally figured it was okay and sent in their money. And even though it seems like we're going down a little bit, I'm not terribly worried because it looks like we just did an adjustment back to where we were before the economy crashed. I will want to keep an eye on this for 2013 to make sure that we're doing everything we need to do to keep it up there or make it higher. But I'm still confident that we've at least recovered from where we were before the crash in the economy. Seeing this a quick way that we can see that very easily. Okay. Now let's see. All right. Now I could do some other quick kinds of analysis in Advisor. We have a couple of places here. We've only been keeping track of how many sends or touches, and by touches we're talking mainly label mailings, direct mail, phone, or emails. We've only been keeping track of who we actually sent those things to for a very short amount of time, since 2007. This is a piece of information that is not stored in our database. It's actually stored in a separate table. So this is one instance where you can see where we've combined different data sources in order to be able to look at a bigger picture of what's going on. And you can see here that on this page I've loaded how many appeals that we've sent, and you can sort of see what the response has been to those appeals. Not surprisingly, our phone-a-thon overall does better than any of the other touches. This is probably true industry-wide. Most places report that phone is the best way to acquire or keep donors. But let's look a little bit at what's happening in 2012 and how we did. So I'm going to look just at the current fiscal year. And you can see in this fiscal year, we just had these 3 kinds of touches. Our phone-a-thon did really well in comparison to direct mail and label mail, although they didn't do badly themselves. But if you notice, there's this little drill down notice here. I can actually look more specifically at targeted appeals. These appeals are generally, we do have some general appeals, and then we also have some that are directed specifically at our units, and you can see how they were doing. And let's look at just the phone-a-thon, because the phone-a-thon seemed to be doing really well. So let's just look at, exclude unselected and only look at phone. And if you look at the phone, you can see that the libraries tend to do really, really well on the phone compared to some of the other units. This is not terribly surprising. People who are in the pool for libraries tend to be people who've already given to the libraries. And people, for example, who are in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences over here, those are people who graduated, and it's a much bigger pool. So we're probably trying to touch more people. So it's not too surprising that they have different results, but you can see from here which ones are most successful, which units. but we can even drill down even further and look at the specific appeals. So if I were to look at the appeals, I could see that actually our health and human performance mid-range appeal did the best compared to any others. And surprisingly enough, our young alumni initial phone appeal to fine arts is doing quite well, especially considering that our fine arts tends to not be as, doesn't tend to raise as much money as some of the bigger units. So it's kind of nice to see that that appeal is doing well. So that's one example of how we can look at the individual appeals and how they're doing. Now, I went through this rather quickly because I know I had to keep it short. I think we're up on time for asking for questions. Is that correct, Doug? Yep. You said there were
questions. If you've got them, type them in, put your hand up, and we'll pick them up. We do have a couple. Do you want one, Audrey?
Sure.
Yeah, there's a question that a lot of teams struggle with leveraging the data to actually get change to happen. So how did your team get on board?
So as far as leveraging data, well, the first step, of course, is getting the data, and that is quite difficult. And the first step, for me at least, the first step was developing a good relationship with the IT department, because that's where most of the data lives. And it's important that the IT team learns to trust you and that you know what you're doing with the data in order to release it to someone like a data analyst who can look at the data and say what's important, what we need to be tracking. So that's one step. And the other thing is to always include the IT staff when you're having these conversations. It's one thing to have a meeting with the VP who says, yep, this is a good idea, but you also want to have someone from IT at the table because they're the ones that can tell you what the bottlenecks are for getting your hands on that actual data. So
yeah, I would add, we've seen challenges in getting the data, which is an excellent point there, Audrey. We've also seen sometimes there's defensiveness in the people who actually execute the programs because they may have been doing things in certain ways for a long time, and it's just they're in the habit of just repeating the same thing over and over again. And that can be challenging too when all of a sudden it's like, no, we actually want to do this a different way and maybe mix the media up, move to fewer, more relevant messages, move to more online, and the team's all been geared up to do, mailings of general types or whatever. Did you have? You must have had some of that as well.
Well, actually, some of that work we did before we got Advisor in terms of, a lot of my work as doing data analysis was the first time I did anything, all I did was tag data and say, this is what I predict will happen, and then they did business as usual so that they could see that some of our efforts would have made a difference before they trusted me to actually make the changes. And that's, and that's good. And that's number one. Number two, we've had people who've been, we're lucky because we have some very responsive people. But my biggest piece of advice actually is to use the data to show people what they're doing right first. Show them what their strengths are, validate them, because they do know what they're doing. Most professionals who've been in annual fund have a pretty good idea of what they're doing and have a general idea that if we could target things better, this would just improve what we're already doing. And sometimes that's the way to approach it. Approach from people's strengths and what they're doing right and say, hey, and this is how we can tweak it to make it even better.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. We see this also when we do work with major giving officers, portfolio pool coverage, penetration stuff, and we would say the data is coaching tips, and we like putting it in the same venue that, it's here's what's done well, you could do it even better if this or this, take a look at it, what about, and just raise them as topics and coaching tips. Yeah, the idea of metrics or not meeting some target can turn people off. I really like the way you put that. A couple of other questions, Audrey. Could you repeat your definition of program health? I think a number of people are interested in what that actually is.
Sure, absolutely. So what we do is we add together the number of new donors plus anybody that we reacquired. That would be somebody who's lapsed and came back on board. And we combine that, and that makes your numerator. And then your denominator, you divide those two things that you've added together, you divide that by the people who did not renew. So they gave last year, but they didn't give this year.
Right. So it's sort of a form of participation, except you're looking at like gains losses as a ratio instead of like the total overall.
Yes, and I will say that I did not come up with that myself. That's something that our annual fund staff, I think, got like at either from a consultant or at a conference, and they brought it back and said, hey, we want to look at that. And I said, okay, great, we'll throw that in the project. Works for me.
Yeah, and there's a couple questions here about the touch data. You said that the touch data, the appeals touches, was in a separate data source. What was it, and how did you integrate it?
Well, so it actually, this is the way I started off. Starting in 2007, when I started doing this work, the people who sent the data to the annual fund people who sent the data, say, to the mail house, would send me a copy. So I would have the text file, and that's the way it started. I eventually just built a table in my Oracle reporting thing, but you can use a text file. That would work too. And I just keep adding to it over, and every time I get one of those text files, I just add the ID number, what appeal they were sent, and what their giving status was at the time it was sent.
Yeah, I'd say we see these stored in a variety of ways. I mean, in some cases, it's literally been Excel spreadsheets. It's probably better doing what you did already, putting in a database table. And there's another related question. We store our history in the IHS screen and colleague benefactor and its common separated values. Would that work for tracking an advisor? The answer is yeah. I mean, when we load data, Audrey's using Oracle and advances the core system, but we could load in additional comma separated tables or spreadsheets or access databases. So when we load the data, we pull in a bunch of tables from the source system, and if it's in, at this question, a separate comma separated file, that's fine. And then we just need some keying field, which is generally ID number would be the best to key it back to the rest of the data. We did one just recently where we got click-through data from the newsletter. So literally each row was, click where the ID numbers were populated in. So ID X clicked on this URL at this specific time, and then the same ID clicked on this other URL at this time. And that was literally like a half-hour exercise to put a page up that had the trends of the click-throughs, but then because it linked to the rest of the advanced data on the ID number, when you clicked on the people who clicked on both the neuroscience article, which might be a bar, it might be a list, say it's a bar, you click that bar, then maybe you also click the math program article, you then got the 4,000 people who clicked on those things, and you see all the other characteristics. So it's really easy, in this kind of an application to link data together like that. Another question for you, Audrey. Are you the primary project builder? If so, how long did it take for you to build this project?
I am the primary project builder. It takes, well, it depends. Once you know the data and you know what you want to put up, it doesn't take that long. It takes a couple of days. However, in the beginning, when you're trying to figure out what you want to put up there and what data you want to add, it might take like a week or so. But it doesn't take that long. It's not, a usual prolonged exercise. Once I know what I want to put in there, it's fairly quick.
And usually we would, as we did with Florida, the advisor team, we have business consultants who would come in and load the initial set of data and build a first project, because the challenge the first time is figuring out, which 40, 50, 20, 100 tables do you actually need, and how do they connect together, and there's fields in some tables that need to be copied. So we basically can create an in-memory data mart, in our apps pretty quickly, which then once that's done, it's very easy to modify and build additional projects. Here's another question. When you track touches, do you track non-solicits as well? For example, the alumni magazine. If so, how is that analyzed here?
I wish that I had that. I don't. If I had that, I would definitely include that. And I could just add that into the same table that I have the appeals in. I mean, that would work just as well. I would just name it as a different thing, like give it a code for alumni magazine or something like that. Unfortunately, we haven't gathered that data yet. I'm working on it.
Yeah, we've got other clients where we do have the touches, and we usually would have a filter up. I think the demo project I had has a page where it has a filter for that. So you can look at just the solicitation touches, or you can look at the total touches. And they tell you different stories. I mean, obviously the solicitation touches have a different tone and venue than the other kinds of touches, but in total, it is the impact of the organization on alumni or prospective donor, and it all adds up together in a case where the advancement group is not clued in what the alumni organization is doing. There may be another group that's sending out, club or trip mailings or these vacation things, and it's all coming to the alumnus, and neither group is seeing the others, and in total, each one may not be that much, but when you add it all up, it's a big load, and it is relevant. So to the extent alumni relations and advancement are aligned and you can combine the data, it's better. I would say, like as Audrey said, often that's probably most often that's not the case, but when it is, it gives you this picture, and you could literally put a filter to add it all together, or to take out and let's look at solicitations. Another question. Can you use data from Google Analytics, email marketing, click-throughs, university database all combined? Actually, I think we kind of got at that one. The answer is yes. Because from a source load, when we load a project like this, and Audrey, I think yours reloads every night. Is that correct?
Yes. Doug, your audio is kind of breaking up for me, and I'm not sure if that's for other people, but it's kind of hard to understand you. So I'm going to try repeating what you just said.
Yeah, give it a go.
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, so the question was, I am hearing echo here. Can you use data from Google Analytics, email marketing, click-throughs, university database all combined? And the question I was asking you is the answer is yes, because when Advisor loads, we load from multiple sources. They don't all have to be the same. And I think you're loading every night. Is that correct? So generally this refreshes daily.
Yes, it refreshes every night. I get a snapshot of all the tables that are in advance. Plus, we have the secondary holding place, if you will, called that's not actually data in advance, but it's built by the report writers and by me, so they're kind of in the background, and those also get loaded. If I wanted to, I could add in text files that, for me, I like to keep them in one place, so I usually put things in the reporting database, but I could pull them from other places as well. Not a problem.
A couple more questions. What do the colors in the bars mean?
Oh, that's a great question. I meant to say something about that. So unlike Doug's project where he had his by the type of message, mine is actually based on a rating. We had our screening with Rensabach, Blair & Associates, and it's basically based on the GG&A annual fund code. So if they had a annual fund code of $100 or less, or actually it's less than $100, they'd be red. Those are all the entities with that red rating. That's basically what it is. So that's why all of these have different colors, because this is the thing that it's colored by.
And then you've used color consistently, it looks like, throughout the pages. So everywhere you see red, you know it's lower rated. If you see the greenish color, they're higher rated prospects.
Right, exactly. So like these dark blue are null, but these greenish ones right here, these are the higher rated prospects, probably the ones that we would put in our mid-range segment.
Okay. There's a question, actually, I'm going to ask you a question. The key learnings from all of this, maybe just take a couple minutes summarizing kind of what's worked really well with leveraging data like this, and what's been some of the challenges, and that's probably going to draw us to the hour here.
Well, what's worked really well is I kind of threw everything, including the kitchen sink that I had access to, in here, and the Florida Fund folks have just run with it. They're awesome. I showed them how to use the project, and they actually have one of the client versions so that they can add data if necessary. So they can, if they have a spreadsheet with a set of IDs and they just want to look and see what this segment looks like, they can throw it in there and just select by those people and see all the different pages, and they just run with it, and it works really, really well. They use it all the time for their planning and for their analysis, that's worked really well. What I wish we had and what I plan for the future is I wish we had the calling data in here. I've started to get some of that. I have like a week's worth just to play with, just to see where we would put it. And once I get that, I want to get a constant stream so that I can actually do some analysis of the phoning data, because that's not in here yet and it should be. I thought about actually, it's kind of cumbersome the way we have to set up with being entity focused. It's really good at looking at segments and looking somewhat at appeals, but in order to really focus on how the appeals are doing, I think it would be better to have a separate project that just has that's centered around the appeals that we sent out. And I know that probably doesn't make sense to a lot of people, but if there's anybody who's like a data person, they might understand what I mean by centering the project around the appeals rather than around the people. But so that's stuff that I'm looking forward to doing in the future. And the other thing that is seriously missing, and that's click-through data like you were talking about before. I know that we have messages that go out, we have newsletters, we get the click-through rates somewhere, but it's not in an easily accessible place for me or even our regular data folks. So that's something I need to get my hands on and for further exploration.
Encourage all of you, that data is highly useful because it's current opt-in information on interest and engagement areas, which can be really useful. Sometimes hard to get from the hosters and the senders, but well worth the effort to get it. Audrey, another question just came in. On your other projects, do you ever push this out to the frontline development officers? And if so, this project seems awfully complicated for that.
This particular project is the most complicated project that we have. We have some simpler projects. And to be honest with you, I'm glad you brought this up because this is actually the thing that didn't work so well. In the beginning, we had a prospect management project that we sent out to the development managers so that they could look at staff performance. And it was, even though I simplified it greatly from this one, it was still a little complicated for people who are not as data-centric in the way they think. And we ended up changing the user base. So instead of we only have 1 or 2 development officers who are using it, and those are the ones that are very they think like this. They are able to do this, and it's fine. Most of our current users are in research, prospect management team, and Florida Fund.
Yeah, what you're saying is fairly typical. I mean, we've got some clients who have pushed this out to frontline field officers as a primary purpose, and it would generally be, instead of this is a fairly, we would call it rich project with a lot of different dimensions and metrics, it would more likely be 3 or 4 pages with a few charts on each page, really simple, with the idea of helping them just get the lists they need for their upcoming visit. And even in that case, we find like a third grab it and run with it. A third, can sit down with an AA and work through it, and a third have trouble unfortunately turning on the computer, so they don't use it as much. But we do have value there, but it needs to be a very different looking project, I would say.
Definitely, definitely.
Well, this has brought us up on the hour. As I said, this has been recorded, and we'll be getting this out to all of you in the next couple weeks. And if there are unanswered questions, we will follow up on them after the webinar. Audrey, I want to thank you tremendously for the time here today and the really good advice and wisdom and use case example.
You're welcome. Oh, great. Thanks. I appreciate
it.
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you, and thank you all for attending, and have a great rest of the day.
All right, you too.